appreciate the opportunity to be here, to be a part of this conversation this evening. The work of the United Church of Christ, our Witness for Justice, is known in the faith community and in a lot of secular circles as well. But one of the things I'm appreciative about many of our leaders, and particularly our churches and pastors in the Central Atlantic Conference, is we don't like just sitting on our history. We want to make real our story today, and we want to do that in partnership with those individuals who are being impacted by injustices across communities in this country and across the communities where our local churches are serving. So we are excited that our national offices are continuing to move forward with Our Faith, Our Vote, Our Voice campaign. And in the Central Atlantic Conference, we have organized our manifestation of that campaign called Faith and Democracy 2020. The key thing about the work that we're doing across the United Church of Christ is that we believe that as people of faith, our relationship with God and the guidance of the gospel and our love for humanity really paves the way for liberation from all forms of hate and oppression. And we believe that liberation is a choice, and that we must choose to embrace it, stand for it, and fight for it. And what better way to do that than an election year where our voice matters, but not just our voice, the people who are being impacted by these injustices. We still believe that the call to engage in public life and the fight for justice and liberation is still the same as it was yesterday. And we are fervent in reminding our leaders, our members across the church, that we are called to exercise what we believe as people of Jesus Christ out in the public square. We also recognize that the journey to rid our communities of injustice and equality has been long, and it has been filled with obstacles and opposition, yet there's no better time than now to be faithful to God's call, and that we believe that led by our faith, focused on freedom and liberation, and energized by love, that we can make a seismic shift towards justice and true democracy at this time in our nation's history. We recognize and embrace the reality that we cannot do this work alone, that we must do this work in partnership with the least of these, and also other like-minded organizations and leaders who believe in collective power and action. We don't take politics to be a dirty word in the United Church of Christ. Politics to us is simply a struggle for power. We think it's important for our pastors and our local churches to understand what power is, how to organize that power, and how to mobilize that power to bring about lasting change for those who need it the most. And that's what our election campaign this year is really all about. It's about making sure that not just people in the pews are exercising their democratic right to vote, but it's also making sure those individuals that our churches serve, either in the pantries or in other so many different ways through social services, that they also are also exercising their right to vote as well. But I know that we're talking about voting tonight, but the reality is, we're in a very important year in our nation's structure where the census is also happening. So we're adding the census as part of our election program as well too. That your voice is important in the political process, making sure that you have a say in who you want representing you, whether it be the local elections, whether it be a state election, whether it be a federal election. But also we want to make sure that your voice is heard in the census, because the census is not just about a count. It determines the political trajectory of most local communities across this country, as well as it determines how state and federal dollars are distributed and where business will choose to do business across the country. So we're lifting up the importance of voting and the importance of participating in the 2020 census. In the Central Atlantic Conference, one of the things that we are focusing on this year as part of our Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign is really trying to build a unified movement across the geographical boundaries that Rabbi Michael mentioned that make up the Central Atlantic Conference. Part of the reason why is because we recognize that our local churches can no longer stay in silos and do this work in isolation, that they must do this work with other UCC local churches. We must do this work ecumenically. We must do this work with our interfaith partners. We must do this work also with our secular partners, those in the civil rights community and those in labor. So we are encouraging them to connect up, hook up, and we're supporting them in developing these relationships on the ground, because we recognize that all politics is local, and the work that needs to happen around justice needs to happen at the local level from the bottom up in order for it to be impactful. So we're working tirelessly to make sure that our people understand the importance of doing this work from a theological and biblical grounding, rooted in a theology of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the biblical concept of justice and peace. We're also making sure that we embrace what I call the art of community organizing, building lasting power and organizing with and for the self-interest of the poor and oppressed toward a common vision of justice and community. We recognize that particularly our clergy have a role to play in this, this Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign. So we're embracing the importance of our prophetic witness and engaging in nonviolent direct action where possible. So I've been excited about how our pastors and churches stepped forward a couple of weeks ago around Juneteenth and stood out there outside of their houses of worship in their local communities, let their community know where they stand on the issues of racial injustices that have been happening across this country over the last couple of weeks and months, as well as to stand in solidarity and say we support Black lives and that Black lives matter. We're also recognizing that we need to be very strategic in how we do this work as well. So we're taking the time to really plan and do what's needed so that our work is impactful, and that it helps prepare us beyond the election, because although elections matter, we recognize that it doesn't just involve an election. What happens after the elections is just as important. So we see this as an important building moment to make sure that we're not just planning for this particular moment, but we're planning for the long haul and preparing for the long haul to make sure that we have those justice networks in those state jurisdictions in our conference to make sure that our leaders are ready when the state legislative sessions happen, so they can make sure that they are standing side by side with those who are most impacted by these issues, embracing their power, their voice, their agency to proclaim what they want to see changed and what they want for themselves and their families, and supporting them in that particular work. Our efforts, of course, just as Rabbi Michael and Nicole mentioned, are nonpartisan. We have to do it that way. We've been very intentional about making sure that our churches and pastors understand that this is a nonpartisan effort, that everything that you do must be nonpartisan. It must be about the issues, talk about the issues, often only the issues, and not about the candidates. Because that's what this is really all about. It's about the issues. It's about the issues that matter to people. It's about the issues that we have been struggling and fighting to see some change around for so many different years. And we believe that yes, this is another election year. This is another historic moment. I don't know how many times I participated in an election year where someone always says this is a historic and defining moment. But yes, this is truly a historic and defining moment. It is true. And we want to make sure that we are part of that critical work moving forward. So our Faith and Democracy 2020 campaign is about voter registration. 2020 census is about voter education and empowerment, trying to make sure that we generate the positive attitudes in people's minds and spirits about going to vote, making sure that they have the education and the information that they need, both about the candidates, about the issues in their elections, and make sure that they have the critical information to know whether or not they're on the voter rolls, also as well as where to go and vote. If they choose to vote by mail, since we're experiencing this COVID-19 beyond a period in time in which we did not anticipate that we would, so people can make sure that they can access the ballot. But then also recognizing that we have to do as much as possible to get out the vote, because we recognize that not all jurisdictions are going to be what I would call helpful and supportive in making sure that people can vote safely. So we're going to do our best to make sure that people get to the polls and vote and protect them in that particular effort. And that's why our national offices have been a partner with the Election Protection Initiative for a number of years, since the 2000 election, when this initiative emerged across the civil rights community. So at the end of the day, I appreciate what Rabbi Michael has shared. I appreciate what Nicole has discussed. And I'm looking forward to engaging you in conversation about this important work and the importance of us doing this from a perspective of faith.
Thank you. Thank you both. This has been fantastic. And, I think we've started to uncover it, but where do we, would love to hear from you all, where do you think is really the unique role that a faith community can have in the conversation that, you just can't find from other communities, from other leaders? What is that special opportunity that exists for the faith community to play a role in conversations around the national dialogue, and in particular around voting?
Well, I think one way we can do that, Rabbi Michael, is we can provide a safe space. Now, although many of our houses of worship are not gathering in person, we still can provide that safe space virtually to have people from different political perspectives to come together and talk about the issues and why they are important. As trusted voices, hopefully most of the community see houses of worship and the faith community as a trusted voice. We can be there and talk about the importance of making sure that everyone engages in this process and making sure that everyone has as much information as possible about the issues as well as the candidates, and providing that opportunity and space for people to get access to the candidates, whether it be through organizing a candidate forum or an issues forum. And then even take that a little step further for some communities, for first-time voters in particular, this can be sort of a terrifying moment for them to go in. If you've never seen a voting machine before, if you don't know how to engage in that process, making sure that we do what's necessary to be in deep partnership with local boards of elections and bringing them to our communities to make sure that they educate the community about the voting machines, what the process is to register to vote, how do you make sure you access an absentee ballot. That's the role we can play in the midst of all of the back and forth between Democrats and Republicans and this particular candidate and this particular candidate. We could be the voice of reason. We could be the voice that gives people the information that they need to make an informed decision, an educated decision.